Hello, everyone watching and listening. Good morning from North Carolina, and welcome back to the Free Radical Podcast, episode number 5 today. And this is your host, Swami Padmanabha. I'm here today, very happy to be in the company of a dear friend, esteemed elder, Arcana-siddhi. That's it, Arcana-siddhi. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be on the podcast, Maharaj.
Thank you. So let me begin our podcast today sharing a few words of Arcana-siddhi, a brief bio of hers. It says like this. Arcana-siddhi joined the Gaudiya Sampradaya in 1976, spending the next 12 years living in the temple ashram in Potomac, Maryland. After the breakup of her first marriage, she returned to graduate school and got her master's degree in clinical social work. She remarried in 1990 to Karnamrita Das, who shared her interest in helping devotees with psychological, emotional, and relational issues that were hindering their progress on the path of bhakti. They were one of the first couples to help create the Grihasta Vision team, which provided knowledge, skill building, and counseling for the Grihasta ashram. Both Arcana-siddhi and Karnamrita taught over 100 seminars together, wrote numerous articles, counseled hundreds of couples, organized couples retreats, and authored several books, some of which are Heart and Soul Connection, a devotional guide to marriage, service, and love, the Vaishnavi Marriage Challenge, and a recent book Arcana-siddhi author with Pranada, When Illness Takes Hold, Hopeful Words for Sadhakas. So before I forget, let me share with you one link for those who will be interested in knowing more about the work of Arcana-siddhi as well as the Grihasta Vision team, which is for those who are only listening, Vaishnava without H, Vaishnava Family Resources.org. So on a personal level, I got to meet Arcana-siddhi a few years ago. I don't know how many of them, but probably like 6 or 7 years ago, I think. And as well as her dear husband, Karnamrita Prabhu, and a host of other friends that in time, basically came to become part of my inner circle and dear family. Arcana-siddhi is one of those esteemed close sisters and friends and elders. And a long time we have been going through very interesting experiences and dynamics together and sharing, having, at least in my opinion, very profound moments of talking with one another and sharing our hearts and sharing reflections and trying to figure out what's Christian consciousness about or what we are about in the midst of that. So I personally feel very blessed, very fortunate to be in his company, to be considered part of her inner circle as well. So he has invited today, this month that we are starting August. My plan is to invite different Vaishnavis, different ladies who practice Vaishnavism in this case to my podcast. So Arcana-siddhi, let me begin by asking you why you are so kind to accept my invitation, why you considered important joining in this discussion and in this connection, what radical personalism is to you.
Yeah, thank you, Maharaj. Well, the main reason was because you asked me, and I value you greatly as a friend and a mentor, and I couldn't say no. Although last night, I was thinking, why didn't I say no?
Too late, sorry.
It was too late. So you got me. So personalism, radical personalism. I think for me, it's it starts philosophically of understanding that Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead, and we're all his part and parcels. And so our connection is with a person, and that's our goal of life. And we have this field of people that we interact with, and they're also all parts and parcels of that same source. And if we treat them as if they're objects, and we treat them as their just something to exploit, then that's the greatest impersonalism. So personalism to me means the kindness and being there for people and sharing your heart with people and having affection for people and seeing them for their core value, which is spiritual, instead of this as the body. This is a man, a woman, black, white, gay, straight, all the different designations which divide us and keep us very impersonal from each other.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm always amazed by hearing other people's experience or idea of radical personalism. I'm just thinking about a few days ago. We did a very beautiful retreat in Michigan with Deva Madhav Prabhu and Jai Jagannath Prabhu and hosts of 30 devotees, and the retreat was basically revolved around the topic of radical personalism. It was called the Radical Personalism Retreat. So it was funny because it was beautiful. Jai Jagannath began asking, like, okay, what's radical personalism for you? At the end of this retreat, he invited everyone, hopefully you have some definition of it. So in our last meeting, there was the different members of the retreat were sharing their idea, what's radical personalism for them. And I was amazed because I'm supposed to be the author of a book called Radical Personalism, but but I'm hearing all these incredible realizations and experiences of what's radical personalism for each person, and it's just widening and expands for me the idea of radical personalism. So I'm completely humbled and amazed to realize how little I know of radical personalism, although I wrote a book with that title, and I'm so blessed by hearing other people like you sharing their own experience of that. So thank you so much.
Do you want to share a highlight of one of those sharings that you heard?
Of one of those sharings there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to be honest, in this precise moment, no specific, like, because Jai Jagan invited them to succinctly define radical personalism kind of in sutra way. And as you may know already, I'm not very good for conciseness. So probably my memory doesn't work to remember those sutra-like definitions. It's recorded, so I'll try to get that. But in general, it was a lot about, it was a lot about what you shared. A lot about, like, how to say, many of them were like, okay, radical personalism is about being yourself. That was pretty succinct. But of course, that came after a 2-day retreat with lots of sharing and lots of vulnerability and lots of. So the phrase being yourself has a completely different meaning after those 2 days than just saying be yourself. It may sound like cliche, like naive or whatever. But actually, when you go through certain experiences together with some people in an immersive experience like the retreat we had, be yourself means like, okay, way more than what you thought. So it was kind of that for me, like these classical words or phrases that we hear, we may repeat, but after certain experiences, it's like, wow, this has a completely different meaning for me now. What does it mean to be yourself, and how much we need to go back to those expressions, basically. What does it mean that you mentioned? God is the supreme personality of Godhead. We say that so many times, but what does it mean? What's implications of relating to that? No, we are person. What's implications of that? So anyhow, I appreciate that, and of course, in connection to today's topic, I think your definition goes hand by hand because it's so much tied with how we relate between each other, how we relate with not only with Krishna but with everything, since everything is connected to Krishna. And that's the title for today's episode, which is the title Arcana-siddhi suggested after I rejected the first option. So the title is Strengthening the Bonds That Free Us. So that's a very interesting title. And of course, it plays with the words that generally we are accustomed that the bond is not freeing us, but is entangling us. But there is a bond that can free us if we strengthen it. So I personally agreed with her title and thought this is an ideal topic for Arcana-siddhi because of her life experience and how her life experience has revolved around this crucial topic, not only of family counseling, as we already read in her bio, but also relationships, which again, our Bhakti project is ultimately all about relationships. So I'd like to begin after this brief introduction, sharing as usual a brief section from Radical Personalism, um, corresponding with today's topic, which is in part 2 of the book, the Manifesto. And in this connection, we'll be connected with one of the many radicals of that section called Radical Correlation. For those who have the book, would like to go more in detail, it's page 110. So it says like this: a big neglect of an erosion in the social fabric of the Gaudiya community has become more and more apparent throughout the last decades. This is evident from parenting to caring, from elders and everything in between, including toxic ways of relating to earning and spending. Each of these domains needs to be dealt with for what they are: potential sacred ingredients of our spiritual project. We call this radical correlation. So, this above section inspired the title for today's episode. Of course, this section includes many things, not only relationships and how we relate not only with elders, but with young people, how we accompany each other in different stages of life, how we relate with earning and spending. So, of course, each of these topics requires separate episodes in themselves. So, we'll try to focus today with Arcana-siddhi in her area of expertise, which is, of course, relationships. But I'd like to begin maybe sharing a few thoughts more in connection with what Arcana-siddhi has been working on for many decades, which is also family counseling and couples and grihasta ashram and experience of it. So, but before me continuing talking about that, I talk a lot. Arcana-siddhi is something you may like to share some thoughts regarding what we have just read, whatever you may like to share to begin with.
Yeah, just to say that the title was actually a title that I came up with years ago, back in the 90s, for a seminar that my husband and I, one of the first seminars we ever did together. And it was for Anuttama Prabhu, who is one of the GBC and ISKCON, had arranged for a family and couples seminar. And so that was the title that I came up with because we were seeing so much devastation in the grihasta ashram of couples not being attached to each other because of being, there had been such a emphasis on renunciation, not even getting married to begin with. That already, that was, you had entered into the wrong door. And then if you did enter into that door, you sure as hell wanted to get out as fast as you could. And so, I knew and still know, devotees who are like, just, 50, I can take sannyasa, or 50, I can, get out of this, the deep dark well. So, it was like we were seeing that, yeah, you're in the grihasta ashram, or you're not present in it. You've entered it, but you haven't actually become part of it. And all the benefits and all that you can, all the advancement that this ashram affords you, you're missing out on it because you're not there. You are checked. You're totally checked out. So we were seeing this in so many of the couples we were working with, and so that was the title. And I think I shared with you the opening scene that we did with that.
You did, but you didn't share with everyone else. So please, again, second time. We need some hasya ras to begin with.
We need some hasya ras, yeah. So we decided to do a skit of, my husband and I did a skit together, and it was, a couple getting married, and it's, it's their wedding night. And so the husband's like, okay, ready? You ready to go? And the wife is like, what do you mean ready to go? Well, let's like, let's consummate the marriage. what are you talking about? We're not ready to have children. Children? Neither am I, but we're married now. Yeah, so so going back and forth, that the complete disconnect for the husband and the wife thinking we don't have sex except for procreation, and the husband's thinking, well, of course, what do you mean we're not having sex except for procreation? And so this was underlying a lot of marriages in the early days, and it still is even today. It's gotten a lot better, but this idea of, we can only have sex for children created so much discord in the marriages. It was very sad, actually. And we were hearing, I guess I also, I had actually been married before. I had a marriage that didn't work out, which was maybe in some ways a real blessing, because it taught me a lot about what was missing in the grihasta ashram. And I really saw how, I was also part of that disillusion of that marriage, because I had very strict ideas about following that principle also.
Mhm.
And so that did play a role in in the demise of that relationship. So yeah, so we were really seeing that this has to be addressed, and we were one of the first couples that started bringing that out into the open. And it was hard. It was like there a lot of guilt and shame around it, and couples just falling down, but then, yeah, feeling like I had one couple tell me that they were leaving Krishna consciousness, they were becoming Christians, and this is what they said. They said, I'd rather be a good Christian than a bad devotee.
Mm.
And that was really, like, really sad, really sad.
Mm. Mm. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Sophie, for sharing and clarifying the background to today's title. For those who didn't know in which direction we are planning to go, or we are open to go. So lots of things you mentioned, lots of things that come to my mind. I'd like to begin, if you allow me, in reply to your words, to share a few words in the idea of like debunking the myth, the false myth that grihasta ashram is necessarily inferior to any other ashram, because as you mentioned, that's such an ingrained prejudice that not only makes we monks proud that we are higher than all of you guys outside of our saffron bubble, so to say, but also that, and I think this is maybe even worse, as you mentioned, makes those who are entering that ashram, or who really have the nature for embracing that ashram, totally disappointed, discouraged, neurotic, paranoid, full of shame and guilt, and entering a place thinking about when they will leave it, or thinking this inferior. So I knew we were planning to go in this direction. So in advance, and just picked a few quotes that I want to share, a few of them, just to show the members of our community how grihasta ashram is not inferior to begin with. It's an ashram. I mean, ashram, sannyasa ashram, brahmacharya ashram. Whether you are married or not, you belong to an ashram. Ashram means shelter. So grihasta ashram is a particular shelter. Sannyasa ashram is another shelter, but a particular shelter won't be necessarily higher than other shelter, or than one who chooses another shelter. It's still ashram. It's still shelter. And of course, there's lots of historical stuff that maybe we don't have time to go through today, but regarding why sometimes we have an overestimated monastic superhero archetype that is coming in our tradition on some level, which takes us to feel, okay, renunciation is necessarily superior when our path is not about renunciation. As Prabhupada said, Krishna consciousness is the science of attachment, not the science of detachment. So how to be properly attached to everything with Krishna in the center. So one quote that comes to mind, and this comes from Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the main book for us Gaudiya Vaishnavas. So just for you to know that this is not something I'm bringing from my own creation, and here it is, I'm sharing it with you. You can check the verse for yourself. Verse 7, chapter 15, verse 67, which is almost the conclusion of one chapter, speaking about the duties of a married person. And it says, if a person worships the Lord with devotion, though he remains in the home, he can attain the supreme. In other words, you can attain the goal of life from the grihasta ashram. So I make this point because many times I've heard about this with these ideas you mentioned. At 50, I have to take sannyas. No? Like if by force. If I do not do that, something inferior will happen. But the Bhagavatam is saying you're going to attain the goal from the grihasta ashram. For example, back a few more quotes, and with this I stop my shower of quotes, but just for us to know how our own acharyas are supporting this idea. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, I have many quotes, I'm sure it's just one of him. If the home is favorable for a devotee's devotional service, then he should not leave. For this reason, Srivas Pandit did not leave home. For a devotee, to remain a householder or a sannyasi is the same. No? In the sense of it's not higher or lower, whatever works better for one's bhakti. That's the best thing. And in that sense, it's the same. Of course, someone may say, well, that's what Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying. He was a grihasta most of his life. But what a monastic will say. So I would like to conclude sharing a quote from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who was Bhaktivinoda Thakur's son, but he was a lifelong brahmachari, lifelong monastic. So we may think, okay, the monastics will be all for the saffron and so on and so forth. But Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur, Saraswati Thakur is saying, family life is favorable for devotees because when a devotee enters family life, he enters a temple. Again, he's making this point very clear. It's an ashram. An ashram is a temple, so to say. It's a shelter. So a few quotes, sorry to share so many, but I think it was important for us to just have a glimpse. There are so many more about how both our Shastra, Bhagavatam, and our Acharyas are making this point very clear. Grihasta ashram is not inferior. I remember Bhaktivinoda Thakur singing in Saranagati, whenever a devotee engages in bhajan at home, he says, that home becomes Golok. So just to put it to the extreme, your house can become Golok Vrindavan. So if your house has the potential to become Golok, why you have to leave such a place? Why we have to leave Golok? So anyhow, what do you think about some of these quotes?
I think they're great quotes, and I guess one piece of it that when we talk about strengthening bonds, we might think, well, what are the bonds? And bonds of affection, bonds of intimacy, bonds of shared purpose, spirituality. These are all bonds that go into making a strong, united force and a protection, because that's what ashram means, to shelter, protection for both husband and the wife. So if we have very weak bonds of affection and we don't want to take care of it, if you don't care about something, if you're not attached to it, you don't want to take care of it. I was just thinking about the example of somebody putting up a Bhagavad Gita in class, and it was all torn up, and the pages were messed up, the binding was messed up, and said, "This is Krishna's Bhagavad Gita." And then he picked up his Bhagavad Gita, which was all nice and pristine, and he said, "This is my Bhagavad Gita." So the idea of ownership turns something to gold. That was the point I think he was making. So this idea of ownership, of caring about something, and that then we put the time and the effort into it, because grihasta life has a lot of sacrifice. It's a lot of when you have children and you're up in the middle of the night with a sick baby for days at a time, it requires that you have a lot of affection. And for people who would say, well, you can be in grihasta life, but don't get attached and don't have affection. I do have one quote that I want to share. It's the only
Yeah,
quote that I
of course.
brought to read because I
Yeah.
love this. It's from Srila Prabhupada, from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 1:842, and it's from a purport. It says, to cut off the tie of all other affections does not mean complete negation of the finer elements like affection for someone else. This is not possible. A living being, whoever he may be, must have this feeling of affection for others because this is a symptom of life. The symptoms of life, such as desire, anger, hankerings, feelings of attraction, etc., cannot be annihilated. So to
Wow.
have
Srila
life,
Prabhupada ki jai.
so maybe you can make some comments because it's a beautiful quote.
Yeah, I already took note of the particular verse, so I'll go through. I wish I had known that one before I published my book to include it, but somehow we will include it somewhere else for sure.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a really good one. Because that's you hear that a lot too. You know, especially from men that, well, I don't want to feel anything for my wife because then I'll be too attached. And no, the only way out is through. We need to be attached in the grihasta ashram. And if you have Krishna in the center of your ashram, then that attachment will be very, very favorable.
Totally agree. Yeah, a verse that comes to mind is, since I won't quote it fully, but it's from Bhagavatam for those who like this one verse that I learned some time ago and some decades ago, and it's one of my favorites. It's in 10th canto, chapter 25, verse 20. It says, Prashangam ajaram pasham atmanakavayo bidhu saibasa dusukrito moksha dwanam apabritam, which basically plays with the word of sangam or attachment and says, like, every person knows that attachment for the material is the greatest entanglement, but that same attachment, what applies to a sadhu or to a devotee, opens the door for realization. So it's the same idea. I mean, it's speaking about attachment and what to do with attachment. It's not saying attachment is bad in every single way, but attachment from an exploitative, selfish place, that's unhealthy. But there is a place to be attached and to a devotee, and attached to a devotee doesn't mean only attached to your guru, attached to your senior temple president or whatever, but you can be attached to your wife or to your husband in the concept of being devotees, to your kids, with Krishna in the center, like contextualizing, so to say, that attachment. And moksha dwaram apabritam, the Bhagavatam is saying, that's opening the doors to liberation, so to say. No? So it's not entangling at all. So it's all about having the proper perspective, and I totally agree how much dysfunctionality happens in the name of not being attached, and which basically is synonymous for some people. Do not feel anything, do not have emotions, and the problem is that our path is all about having feelings and emotions and learning to relate with everything. And ultimately, as I like to emphasize, especially as Gaudiya Vaishnavas, our goal is not a lila, which means a lila which is fully divine but also fully human. So we have to explore the fullness of our humanity as sadhakas first, before we embrace the fullness of our humanity as perfected beings. So how can you attain that? By neglecting emotions and neglecting feelings and becoming as detached as possible. I mean, the goal of our tradition is bhakti. The goal is not detachment. The means is not detachment either. So that's important. For us, detachment is the byproduct of our attachment. That's what we always mention. By properly being attached to Krishna and to everything in connection to him, we will be detached from a false sense of relating to everything. But ultimately, we don't need to reject anything. And I like the point you made, Arcana-siddhi, on how grihasta ashram is so based in on sacrifice and on self-forgetfulness, in the sense that you cannot think too much about you because you have so many, you have to be with your baby and so many necessities. And that reminded me, a few weeks ago I visited Nam Rasa Prabhu and Tulsi, his wife, and the kids there in New Jersey. I stay a week in her house, basically. And I like to stay there for many reasons, of course. But one of the reasons for me is like I like to witness the demanding situation in which they are as the grihastas, and how they choose to be there. Of course, it's voluntary, so it's glorious, and how much they have to sacrifice themselves, and how much they have to forget about themselves in order to dedicate to the necessities of service in the ashram. So I was thinking, okay, me as a sannyasi do not have biological kids, so but somehow or other I have to learn to express that same level of dedication, sacrifice, and self-forgetfulness in my own way as a sannyasi. So these guys are teaching me a very huge lesson, because if I don't get that point, I can just enter monastic order as a way of evasiveness, of complacency, of mediocrity, of just attached to having a easy life, lots of kijais.
That's so true. Yeah.
So for me, it was like, okay, this is a great reminder. So I have to find my own way of dealing with that. Not like I remember once, and with this I conclude my words. I was in Argentina once giving a lecture, and at the end, I shared this a few times. Someone asked me, I gave the lecture, and someone raised their hand, and he told me, okay, you can talk about all the things which are very nice and so on, because you have time to study and read and meditate and do your stuff. And the guy was like, his voice was getting higher and higher and becoming more and more agitated. And then he told me, but I don't have time for any of those things because I have 8 kids and I have to be all day working and attending them. And he was kind of complaining about that. And the only reply that came to my mind, of course, to begin with, was, well, you chose to have those 8 kids. No, I mean, take responsibility for your actions. And second, I immediately came, okay, I don't have any biological children, but in one sense, as a sannyasi, I have another people that I take care of. And in one sense, they are children. And they are much more than the ones I can have biologically. So if I try to accept sannyasa as a way of evading that commitment, I made the wrong move, basically.
Wow.
So anyhow,
and I do see you just taking care of so many devotees. It's actually amazing to me that.
So it's not about me. It's not about me.
No, I know it's not about you, but I just, the only thing, I just had to say that because you do give a lot. You sacrifice a lot to minister to the needs of many Vaishnavas, and that's beautiful. And it's you do have many children. Prabhupada said that. Prabhupada said, I left my 3 children that he had, or 4 children, I can't remember. And he said, and now I have hundreds of children, because and I feel also, I have my biological child who I adore, and my beautiful
grandchild now.
Grandchild, and my daughter-in-law. It's beautiful family. And I also have many devotees that I think of a family, that I worked with for years, and they are like children in the sense of the connection that we've developed, and revealing one's mind and confidence in a counseling situation is very, and you do that also in mentoring so many Vaishnavas. It's really an honor and a privilege to be let into people's lives like that, and the connections that you can make, and it's a big responsibility.
Yeah, totally. Probably, in my particular case, my attempt to dedicate myself to others, again, I have to acknowledge that probably lots of that I learned from grihastas. How they, again, I remember talking with Namras in New Jersey, going back to that situation, and he told me, in this situation, I have to be fully present in the present moment, because I cannot just let my mind go too much to the future or to the past, because my kids are there. I have to be present and attentive, because some of them will have 6 months, 2 years. So I cannot allow myself to, I have to be in the present, which is a very important thing that sometimes we are not very able to be capable of being in the present. So it's a situation that forces you with full presence in the immediate moment. So I really was like, wow, I have to learn that skill way more. But yeah, I appreciate your words, and I agree about the privilege of being led into the lives of other people. And of course, that's in one sense that's the biggest commitment, because I mean you receive the key of someone's heart, and as I mentioned, that's very vulnerable. The person is opening the heart, is being basically naked in front of you with all transparency, and you can convert that in a moment of full empowerment, or a moment of terrible abuse. No, so yeah, I appreciate that, and I like to share a comment that came here in connection to what we are talking, Arjuna-siddhi, since sometimes we share some comments and continue sharing to continue in this topic. So it's a comment from Madhu Mangal Radhakanta Das. He says, "Yet in the early days, parents were encouraged and at times forced to give up their children to the gurukuls to raise, while they were sent off to other states and countries to sell books. Thank God my parents refused to give me away. This caused irreparable damage to the parent-child relationship dynamic, and also is a trainee why so many second-generation devotees suffer such trauma and heavy addiction issues that still have not been addressed."
Yeah.
You have you have witnessed, I imagine, some of those situations. Anything you like to
Yeah,
share in that connection?
sure. Yeah.
Since I have not gone through to that chapter myself, so
Yeah, and I think that in the beginning days of Prabhupada's mission, we were, I mean, gosh, we were in our 20s, and our our leaders were maybe in their late 20s, maybe in their early 30s,
mm,
and we were trying to figure out how to, I mean, of course, Prabhupada was still on the planet, but he was one person and he had a lot of projects, and he was putting people in charge that, kind of like, what are they like in the World War II? They had these 60-day wonders where enlisted men would be put into a 2-month program to become a officer, and then they were leading troops into battle with that,
mm,
after just such a short time. And so, of course, there were a lot of casualties because of that, but it was a necessity of the time, we could say.
mm,
So Prabhupada had that necessity. He knew he had a short amount of time. He'd already had heart attacks, and he knew his health was failing, and he needed to put things in place so that his movement could go on in his absence. And I think, in that, he had to, whatever Krishna sent him, he had to use that. So we
mhm,
had some pretty, not very spiritually advanced and not very materially savvy. The leaders that were leading, the big projects. And so there were a lot of mistakes made in those early days. And the Gurukul, I mean, to this, the devotee that made the comment, I sent my son to a Gurukul also when he was 5 years old, but I was in a little bit of the second wave of the Gurukuls, and the Gurukul that he went to was a very small Gurukul in Baltimore, run by Mandrani, she's just a saint. I mean, just an amazing woman and devotee. And I'm actually very grateful for his experience, and it was, it was hard in the sense that he was separated from his family, but we did move to Baltimore so we could spend weekends with him. And then at 8 years old we brought him home because she started having a day school, so we thought, well, that would be ideal, which really is ideal, and that's what we see in the schools that are here in Alachua. It's a day school, and the children are thriving in that. I think the days of sending kids off to Gurukul, I think there are still, in Mayapur and Vrindavan, those Gurukuls which are boarding schools are still operating. But I think it was, I understand in theory how that could be a good thing, but in practice, we have to see the results from how it all played out, and I'm so sorry for some of that first generation of children who were really, so many of them were abused and just neglected and mistreated, and never want to see that being replayed out. But at the same time, I know Krishna has a very soft heart, and those devotees, Krishna's taking care of them. And I see, I counsel some of those. Now they're in their middle-aged devotees, and they've, a lot of them are making peace with their past, and taking, being able to extract the Krishna consciousness that they were given. And so you see that the full circle of that coming. And yeah, we were part of a pioneer generation, and that's always going to be, there's going to be a lot of casualties, and but I know that Krishna will carry what all these these children went through, carry what they lack, and help them as they go forward in their spiritual life and into the future.
Yeah, thanks for sharing a little bit of your testimony and giving trying to see everything from a bigger picture, so to say, because in situations like this, especially where abuse is going on, even sometimes not with bad intentions, so to say, but just out of naivete or out, as you mentioned, of lack of certain skills that will build upon time. So it's always healthy and healing to keep bigger pictures and try to be as empathic as possible, and acknowledge the things with discernment, that of course I'm trying to redeem the past in the present moment, but also put everything on the scale, be compassionate, empathic, see bigger pictures, and try to take a stance that allows us to move forward, hopefully without resentfulness and so on. So you were mentioning about your counseling couples, and it came to my mind the question, like, if there is any, of course without entering to any specific details and names and cases, but which are like the main issues that are brought to you by couples who are devotees, practitioners, that I think most of the ones you counsel are. So just to have a little bit of a side gaze, not to have a taste of what's the most pervading situations that they find they need to bring to the table, so to say.
Yeah. That question just made me pause a little bit, because I'm thinking, there's such a variety of problems within the grihasta ashram that it's like we might think, oh, it's one major thing.
The top 5 you can give.
Yeah, well, certainly the sexual compatibility is a big one, and that's a big topic. It's
that's why I chose to make my very first episode on that topic.
Yes,
and of course we can make a whole season on that topic, but at least I try to make that point. Okay, let's begin with this one, because this is a huge topic.
Yeah, it really is. And I appreciated Radhamadava, right? Was his presentation, and I really appreciate the idea of seeing the sacredness in all aspects of intimacy, all aspects of intimacy as being sacred. And if we could elevate physical intimacy into the sacred realm, I think, that would be a huge help, that if we were seeing it as actually a service to the relationship, service to the, because strengthening the bond and doing it in a conscious way where we really, cherish each other cherishing one another and not seeing each other as sense objects for our own gratification. And so,
which is, sorry to interrupt, but which I came to my mind that, of course, that's how it should be, but that's so difficult for many. And I'm not justifying anything here, but just because to have physical intimacy, so to say, in a sacred way, you are basically invited to cultivate intimacy, not only on a physical level, but with your own emotions,
exactly.
the emotion of the other person. And that requires lots of vulnerability and lots of nakedness, not only in a physical sense, of course. And most of us are terrified about that. So,
yeah. And that's the thing. I was Radhamadhava, 17 years. He was in the brahmachari ashram. His purity is, comes across, and his, his dedication and his, his just, he just imbibes this purity about him. So when you have devotees that are on a higher level like that, then everything that they do can be in that proper consciousness. And I think, what we're dealing with mostly are, devotees in the stage of, anartha-nivritti. And yeah, so much of what we're doing is, we're going through our healing our wounds from the past with each other, and confronting, our dark side, our shadow side, and having to, really take a good look at all of our baggage, so to speak. So I guess this is really the overarching thing that I see in couples counseling is, we all bring our little red wagons full of, our unresolved issues from the past. And we do marry our unresolved issues. I mean, it's uncanny. I mean, even Freud said, that there, he called it the repetition compulsion. We call it karma, but the idea that you gravitate towards something from your past, and even though, you think, oh God, you came from an alcoholic family, I'm never going to marry an alcoholic, but somehow unconsciously you're drawn towards that. It's like unfinished business. And so
how many times those unresolved issues may take the form of sexual expression toward other person, but in a totally unresolved, from a totally unresolved place. So you objectify the person, you exploit the person, you are aggressive, you are not sensitive enough, and so on and so forth. So that's not, of course, the sacred sexuality we have been talking about.
Exactly. And that's all.
Because sometimes people would say, okay, you are talking about having easy sex or something, but what we are talking is, no, this is the most challenging and difficult way of having sex, because it entails you have to deal with your own stuff, to heal your heart, to go to the shed and find all the unconscious for properly proper intimacy to be happening. So that's way more challenging. That's not cheap.
Exactly. And
that's way more rewarding as well, for sure.
Yeah. And, for couples to, so many of the early couples had, in the very beginning, couples didn't even speak to each other till the day they were getting married. Now that's just insane.
Yeah, when I heard that one, I almost fell from a chair. Yeah, they didn't know the name of each other sometimes. And I heard that one once, that the girl was talking to her mom and saying, "Mom, I'm getting married, like whatever, next weekend." and the mom, "Oh, really? Wow." She was like, "What's the name of your husband?" And she was like, "Wait a minute, what's your name?" Just like, I cannot think what the mother was thinking at that moment. Hopefully, she survived a heart attack at that point. Yeah, that was too much. Too much.
Yeah, it was just, I mean, my first marriage, I did have some association for 2 months, for about 45 minutes every night, drinking hot milk and reading Krishna books. So I can't say we knew each other very well. There were big surprises.
My God, my God. We laugh, so we don't cry. Actually,
So
so actually, we
actually, so yeah.
cry in profuse tears. Yeah.
And I can say every single one of the marriages that were kind of put together during my time in the ashram, none of them are together anymore. None. So 100% divorce rate, and from that early time, you know.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I remember Radha Mother mentioned something like that as well. The statistics are like brutal, so to say. It's too clear that it was a failure. So yeah, Palena Farishite, you judged the tree for the fruit. So as romantic and idealized as it sounds, Vedic culture or this or that, arranged marriage or being strict and so on and so forth, we need to recalibrate how we are approaching because the results are disastrous, basically.
well, I would say we were a far cry from Vedic marriages, because in a Vedic marriage,
Yeah,
they had the astrology, the charts
yeah,
were
yeah.
done, the families knew each other, they were of the same gotra. You know, there was a lot of care taken into putting people together,
Yeah.
and I think, you know, that has some merit to it.
Yeah,
Love marriage,
when I said very marriage was how it was presented. No, I would
how it
not
was
say
presented.
so called actually, but it
Yeah,
was taught in.
exactly. Yeah, how it actually was, yeah, translated into our early day culture.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So any other issue that also you find from the couples that you are counseling apart from the
Yeah, I would
sexual
say, you know,
dynamics, so to say?
the roles, you know, roles in marriage. It's, you know, and I don't think this is just from a devotee standpoint. I think this is probably in the secular world just the same. Of, you know, even though women have, you know, gone into the workplace and they have, you know, become just as qualified as men to earn in earnings, still there is this feeling, and women, and a lot of times women put it on themselves. It's like, I still have to do it all at home. I have to
Hmm.
cook, I have to clean, I have to take care of the kids, and I have to work a full-time job.
Hmm.
And then there's a lot of resentment in that area. And yeah, sometimes the men expect it too, because that's what they saw their mothers do. And so this does come up as one of the issues of, you know, roles, and feeling like there's an equal distribution of
Hmm.
shared responsibilities within the home.
Hmm. How much do you find situations where men are, well, you already are telling about that, where they are not very taking full responsibility in in their part of the relationship, and I imagine lots of situations where also men have way more difficulty in contacting their emotions and contacting their wife's emotions and opening to their feminine side, so to say. No,
Yeah,
I don't know
yeah.
how much of a highlight or a downlight that is also.
Yeah, totally. That's a big one. Thank you, Maharaj. Yeah, women are are wanting much more than ever before emotional intimacy,
Mm,
and um, men are from, you know, we know that that's, you know, the from very early on, men are told, you know, little boys don't cry, you know, just suck it up, you know, just, you know, that it's so ingrained, and I see it so much. I remember my brother and I were at the beach years ago with his little boy who was like 2, and he was going into the water and putting his toes in and then running back, and my brother was saying, "Don't be a wimp, stop being such a wimp, get your butt in there." And I'm
mm,
like, I was so shocked, you know. It's like my brother was,
Yeah.
a
Wow.
professional person. He was a doctor. And I'm
Okay.
like, what are you doing? Where did you get that from? And is that how is that the way dad talked to you? And
Yeah,
yeah, so
probably he's just extending the same pattern he himself received, or even he may be trying to give a better pattern, but it still is worse enough.
yeah, so it's like, I really was surprised because I don't think of him as being like a macho,
Hmm.
man, but yet these are legacy burdens.
Mhm.
They're these paradigms that we just they're automatically, we've imbibed them and they come
Yeah.
out of us and we transmit them generation after generation until somebody says, "Hey, stop. This is
Hmm.
not healthy. We're not doing this anymore. I am going to break this cycle.
Hmm.
I'm not letting it go to my children."
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's so crucial. And I think so many, not only in this particular topic today, but in so many other topics, not only this generation, I will say every generation has the duty of doing that exact same thing of how to say appreciating the legacy received from the previous generations, but also knowing which cycles to break or
Yeah.
to upgrade, if you will. Every generation has that duty to be honoring the elders and the legacy, but also refining and polishing and continuing upgrading. And even if there's something dysfunctional, learning to break the cycle. Don't be afraid to break the cycle and begin a new one, although it may be challenging because it's creating something from sometimes from scratch and having opposition and being treated
Yeah.
as a betrayer of the tradition or whatever. But yeah, I think there is a particular, at least in my personal experience, I feel it's in the air, so to say, that there's the need for something of that, not only this particular topic, but so many others also in our community, learning to break some vicious cycles and upgrading our understanding of them. And also, do you think that some, as we talked at the beginning, some of the problems and concern from the families are in them in itself the idea that family life is inferior, or how much do they bring that to the table, or they are at present most of them that you counsel balanced enough as to understand we are not entering into a dark well, so to say. We are not that bad, or so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly in this community, and I counsel a lot of devotees from the UK. Interestingly enough, and that's a huge grihasta community, and so I think in these big grihasta communities where you have a lot of professional devotees in professional careers, and I I really don't think they're carrying so much of that,
Mm,
um, that grihasta life is less than, because they're very respected and by
mm,
their communities, and in fact they're in charge of the communities as well, like the grihastas, and um, so I think that in those larger communities, but yet I have a good friend in the Grihasta Vision team, two devotees, Uttama and Partha, who do a lot of traveling and teaching still, and they go to Eastern European countries and South America, and they go to places that maybe are a little less, they haven't quite caught up to the to
mm.
the modern outlook that some devotees have. And um, Partha was sharing that, yeah, he went to a wedding in
Sorry.
In Brazil,
Hmm.
and the devotees gave the groom a present, and it was a bucket, a flashlight, and a rope.
Hmm.
So you're entering the deep dark well. So you need
Oh,
these are the things you need.
I was wondering why that gift. Now it was, unfortunately, was clear. Oh my gosh. So still
So
we have some remnants
So
over
still
there.
some, and they see it a lot actually,
Mm,
and sadly, and it kind of feels like in Europe that they've always been like maybe 20 years behind, kind of where you
mm,
know the United States is with their Krishna consciousness, maybe. for different reasons. But so they're a little behind on
Mm,
their where they're at with it. But yeah, there's still a lot of the
mm,
misogynistic, you know, attitudes and just yeah, that women are less than. That's where it
mm,
starts. You know, is
mm.
that women are less than, and then if you don't value your wife, then and then the kid, it's a whole
Yeah, it's
snowball
snowball.
effect.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, and just to clarify, because this expression, the dark well, deep dark well of family life, that's in the Bhagavatam, but it's not referring to Grihasta ashram. No,
exactly.
it's referring to a married life, but which is totally selfish, exploitative, with full of ulterior motives and separate agenda. So that's the deep dark well of family life. That's not Grihasta ashram. And a devotee is supposed to enter Grihasta, as we say, ashram. Because
Yeah,
also, as I mentioned, you can be a monastic, and you have like very similar risks in another way. In its own way, you can be a monastic and fall into so many other situations. And also you have the deep dark well of monastic life. Now it's
yeah.
not only reserved for family life. And just an idea that comes to me, because again, if family life is so ugly or so bad as some people may think, well, we should be aware that we as Gaudiya Vaishnavas, our ultimate goal in Vrindavan and Nityanavadi, in both cases, it will be family life. You won't be a monastic in the Lila. So if you over idealize monasticism that much, that may prevent you
Mm,
from attaining that ultimate goal in which you won't be a monastic.
mm,
So we better don't get too attached to our saffron cloth. No, I'm saying that for myself. Because again, if we overemphasize ashram, varna ashram considerations above bhakti, that goes against the very definition of bhakti we follow, which is the one that Rupa Goswami gives, Anyavilasita sunyam jnana karmadhyana abritama, where bhakti is not mixed with these ashram considerations. It's not that depending your ashram, you are higher or lower. That's a deviated, distorted conception of bhakti that we will be having, because again, the scriptures show you can practice bhakti grihataka vanitaka bhaktinotaka, in the forest, at home,
mm-hmm.
stanestita devout, and say you can keep your social position and engage in bhakti. I always, it always comes to my mind when Krishna is showing the Brajavasis their next life, and all the Brajavasis are like, okay, what, they're already wanting something, and unfortunately they
Mm,
see that. So Krishna shows that their next life will be exactly what they are doing in the present life, which is with their house, with their family, with their cows, with their attachments, with Krishna in the center, and they're just in ecstasy celebrating. I mean, they didn't want to see themselves as sannyasis or monastics or something like that.
yeah.
So just further pondering this post in case some doubt remaining here and there. So something that comes to mind, Arch and Sid, I don't know if you want to go to that place, but also we are talking about Grihastashram. Of course, many devotees may begin before Grihastashram being brahmacharis for some time, and eventually monastics, and eventually feeling the call,
Mhm,
the need, the nature to embrace Grihastashram, or even, let's put it, not extreme, but in a little bit more nuance, some devotees may even accept the order of sannyas and eventually realize it was too much. At least that happened a lot during Prabhupada's times and the years
mhm.
that followed. Again, lots of new practitioners, young. Uh, I know that nowadays some cautions are there in terms of, okay, take some time for that. I remember myself. I was being told to that I could accept sannyas since I was like 20, 21 years old, and I felt the call. I felt the invitation. I feel the nature to do that. I felt the nature to do that. But a friend of mine told me you can better wait 10 years and see if you still are with that idea in mind. So I like the idea. So my point is transitioning into an ashram, no, in this case into grihastha ashram. And I think that's an important thing, because sometimes there are not too much support and proper accompaniment in transitional periods, which for me
Exactly.
are as important as the permanent stages in themselves. No,
Yeah.
because in those transitions, some transition can last for years. It can be not just a weekend. So sometimes I feel we lack certain even rites of passage. We were doing some talks with Jai Jagannath recently about that. How sometimes if you were brahmachari, to give an example, and eventually you're entering grihasta ashram, it's healthy to make some ritual or rites of passage in which you are letting go of that previous identity and embracing a new one, and bidding farewell to that monastic template with gratefulness and love, and the community is acknowledging that and is thanking you for that, and is inviting you to enter this new chapter. Whatever, sometimes a ritual may help to symbolize that, or whatever it may form it may take. But I think it's important also this transition period and the accompany and the support in that. So I don't know what, even in the Shastra, some ashram is mentioned called Shnataka ashram. Especially in Mahabharata comes this term, Shnataka, which means the transition, classically speaking, from the student being in a gurukul with the guru, traditionally in India, and before getting married and started his married life, this particular threshold, liminal space transition, is called Snataka ashram. It's another ashram, so to say. No? Still we need an ashram in those transitions. That's the point. Still we need a shelter when we are passing from one shelter to the other, from brahmachari ashram to grihastha ashram. There's an in-between shelter, but how much of a shelter we are providing in those particular transitions. So I'd like to hear some thoughts about that from you also.
Yeah, some different points were coming to mind.
Yeah.
One is that I think it's wonderful when devotees have the opportunity to start off in a brahmacharini kind of ashram situation where they get the kind of training of, getting up early in the morning and being able to have a steady practice and just living bhakti in every way, that immersion experience that we all had in the beginning. And I have just, been so grateful that I was able to do that, because in grihasta life, I was able to continue to have that kind of stability in my practice and be able to, so that's one thing that the value of having that monastic kind of experience. Secondly is, as far as transitions go, yeah, I remember the transition for men. It was like
I'm asking because I'm sure you have gone through that, not only yourself, but in counseling couples who may already be married officially, but haven't done the proper transition. So they are still not fully there, as you mentioned before. Yeah.
Yeah, because suddenly a devotee would show up in white in Mangal Artik after, they were in saffron for years. And then one day they're just in white and everybody's like, that was kind of the reaction, was like snickering and, pointing, So it was not a great way to transition, somebody. And I think, had there been more of a, the whole community should have come together and said, this is, like you were saying, rite of passage and something beautiful, and that this is the next stage, because that was the way it was in Vedic times, right? That they would, brahmacharya to 25, and then it was just a natural expectation that you would go on into grihasta life and then go into vanaprastha and sannyas later on in life, kind of following the lead of the human design, our physical bodies, So, one thing I'm not exactly as far as the actual transition, but something where the whole community would be involved and it would be a celebration and it would be, that I think that would help, and everybody giving prayers and blessings to the couple.
Which of course,
not to the couple, but if to that devotee, and praying for their success in their new endeavor, and just really, making it something where just to build community. I mean, that's, I think, so much what has been lacking, is like, it's all like this individualism kind of attitude pervading our communities, rather than a collective and a we and an us and we're in this together. It's this individualistic kind of mentality of us, me against everybody else. So
Yeah. But of course, for that to happen, that blessings and that support, first we need to get rid of this idea that entering grihasta ashram is bad.
yeah,
Because
exactly.
again, there is a sequence there. So if you still hold that misconception, you won't feel like celebrating that. So again, for many it's shameful, and there's lots of guilt, and they will feel I'm being demoted here. So nobody's celebrating, everyone is judging or who knows what. And that even especially applies, again, I have some friends and people I know who had accepted the order of sannyas with good intention, but without thinking or giving themselves too much time to test if that's actually something sustainable for them. And eventually they realize it's not sustainable. And at least I appreciate they are honest enough to recognize that and leave the situation, instead of continuing externally as a sannyasi while in the background doing some other stuff, which has happened as well. And of course, I know that may be a more delicate situation. The sannyasi journal is more like of a public figure or a leader, but at the same time, I think we need to heal that chapter and do not stigmatize someone who, with good intention, tried to do their best and somehow found this is not my ashram. And I know that scriptures will use heavy terms like bantasi, you are eating your own vomit, and so on. But it's important, I think, to understand the gist of that. Okay, you rejected something, you are accepting it back, but there is a place to do that from a sincere, healing, healthy place as well. And you can continue progressing, again, because going back to the teaching, it's not that we have to be a sannyasi to attain perfection. So if you were a sannyasi and you left sannyas in a healthy, sincere way, there is place for you to attain perfection. It's not that, no, in this lifetime, no, you have to wait another one so you accept sannyas and you can sustain that. No, so I don't think that's a healthy way to think about that. And in that connection, I remember we had a talk with the two of us in Alachua a month ago. I don't recall how so much traveling now, but I was in Alachua like a month ago, I will say. And we were talking at one point in the table, I remember, in connection to this idea of vows and the lack of capacity to sustain some vows, and how most of the devotees will be in a stage called anishtita bhajana kriya, which means lack of stability, unsteadiness in bhakti. And one of the symptoms of that, at least according to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, is niyama akshama, which means lack of capacity to sustain one's vows. But at the same time, we are accepting so many vows, being in a stage where one of the features is you won't be able to sustain some vows. So we were talking about the importance of invoking vows that are sustainable, basically.
Yeah.
And that will depend on each individual person, not necessarily like one single formula, universal vow that everything has to follow to be initiated or to be a devotee. And if not, sorry. So I don't know if you want to add some thoughts in that connection.
Yeah, well, that was an interesting conversation that we had, for sure. And kind of seeing that devotees are taking vows, like, especially no illicit sex, and taking that vow at sometimes they're very young when they take that vow, and young spiritually and their physical body, and so they really don't know what their future's how their future's going to unfold. And so then they hit a time where where they're breaking that vow, and then there's a lot of guilt and shame around not being able to follow. And then and what I think is really, if devotees could have, if devotees are able to have someone that they can go to and say, hey, I'm having a problem with this. Can you, help me? And in the past, unfortunately, one thing that devotees aren't good at, and hopefully now that's changing, but is in the area of confidentiality. So if a devotee went and revealed his mind in confidence to someone in his community or in his ashram, that information would get leaked out very, quickly. And so, devotees left. I mean, I remember the case with, I think it was one temple president in Chicago, or anyway, he was having a hard time and he revealed his mind, and it did go all over. And Prabhupada was very upset that had happened, that, that this devotee had said that he was having difficulties, and then it became public information. So yeah, so the question is, should we be having devotees take vows that they can't keep, or there's a good chance that they're not going to be able to keep,
and they will fake that they are continuing keeping it because the status quo is like, you have to do this in order to be a devotee. That's, for me, that's the main problem.
That's the main problem.
Why they behave like that, why they accept things that they know, sometimes they know they won't be following, but nonetheless they accept them. Or if they try to follow and they break, they fake it. So the main problem for me is why they behave like that, and probably because they receive the message, unless you follow these vows, you cannot be a devotee. Basically, you are not part, you cannot belong. And of course all of us want to belong, but they end up not belonging, but forcing themselves to fit in by faking, by cheating themselves and others, which is the opposite of what we are supposed to be doing.
Exactly. And then it really does affect their progress in bhakti. And you become more image conscious, and that becomes more important to you than your actual spiritual advancement. And that's really the travesty. So yeah.
I personally, I'm of the idea, of course not everyone may agree with me, but that one should accept vows in a very individual way that one can sustain. Whenever one is accepting a guru and taking initiation on one commitment or another, one should, there shouldn't be just one single universal formula that everyone is expected to follow in the exact same way, because not everyone is in the exact same person in the exact same stage. So it's, for me, I mean, I can understand why that was established as such in some societies. Okay, this seems to be working, let's continue. But in time, I think it has to become more nuanced and personalized, because if not, there is that may be a form of impersonalism.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Yeah, that's radical personalism, is giving, treating everybody like an individual. It's not one size fits all.
Yeah.
And I think, and some of that is, when you have a big organization, it's kind of more for, just having things run smoothly, that you do that. You don't have the resources and the people power to be able to be so individual and personal. But that's what's needed. I mean, the village guru system, I love, the idea that a small, group of people under a guru and living together, and that's beautiful. And I guess, trying to create that somewhat with the mentor system that, I know Radhanath Swami has brought into practice, and some other devotees. I think that's, trying to approximate that village guru model, which I think is very beautiful.
Yeah, we were talking about that also in one, I think my second lecture I gave in the Michigan retreat on Guru Tattva, about different models of the guru-disciple relationship that may be required nowadays. And of course, we are not saying with this, go back to the village life and live with your guru in the exact same way that this was done thousands of years ago. It may not happen and work for most. But as you mentioned, how to reproduce this dynamic of intimacy and smaller groups, while the big groups and the big institutions remain there. I'm not saying they are not necessary, and the structures are there, and the more abstract, generic formulas are there to somehow keep establish some order. But at the same time, in time, we have to look back and revise the fruits of that and the necessity. At least I personally agree with you on making it more personal, more specific, more localized, more intimate, and more realistic and more human, basically, to each particular person's unique situation, and receive that specified guidance. I mean, that gives so much nourishment and so much enthusiasm, as to really, yeah, ascertain who you are. I mean, not only who you are ultimately in your service to Krishna, but who you are as a human being. What's your nature? What's your needs as the particular class you belong to. No? So even on a psychological, emotional level, we need to ascertain which is my species, not only human species, but and this brings to my mind, if you allow me to invoke this point, the idea of the Enneagram. Of course, it's a whole different episode. That sense. But I like to touch upon that for a minute, because you work with the Enneagram for years in your counseling couples and so on. And it's quite connected to this idea of getting to know who we are in terms of our personality and nature, and the importance of understanding people are different. They're not all always the same, and the same advice works for everyone in the same way. So I don't know if you want to share a few words and also introduce the audience briefly to what's the Enneagram, because they may not know, and how it had been your experience in that connection.
Yeah, well, Atmanam Manyate Jagat, that we generally judge other people according to ourselves. So if I would have done or said this, that would mean this to me. So it must mean the same to you.
How many times I've heard that thing? You did that, Maharaj. I would have reacted differently. To begin with, you don't know if the person, because the person is saying that without being in the situation. But even if it would have been differently, that doesn't mean better or worse. It's just different. No?
Yeah. So it's, getting to have this sense of curiosity about people, instead of, right away making assumptions and judging people according to how we would do something or how we would feel if we were in that situation. So the Enneagram it's a personality topography that's very, it's an amazing system, and different theories where it came from originally.
I heard from the Desert Fathers of
Desert
early Christianity,
Fathers,
right?
yeah, that's one of the ideas, that it came from the Desert Fathers, and has, it's not only, what it basically does is it shows us the conditioning that we're in, and we're trapped inside of our conditioning like a cell. And the Enneagram is actually giving us the key to understand how we can get out of the traps of our ego. Basically, we have all these ego trips and our stories and our and how we can, here's the key, because each type has certain, ways of behaving and acting that are really not good strategies for getting what, for transcending. And ultimately, it's a very spiritual system that helps us to elevate our consciousness through the different levels of our type. It's not something you just do in once. It's a lifelong practice, along with bhakti. I mean, bhakti. It's almost like if you're practicing bhakti and you're very serious about your practices and you have cleared away a lot of your anartas, you actually see yourself going up these levels that they have in the Enneagram. It correlates kind of with stages of development in bhakti. It's very interesting.
Interesting. So, what has been your experience in working with that system with devotees and counseling couples? And
It's been so helpful. It's like you can cut through a lot by kind of when you first meet a couple or meet an individual in counseling, and you have a feel for a sense, the energy that each type emits from a person, and so gives you a whole conceptual orientation of this person that really helps you to know what direction to go as far as what their needs are, what their motivations are, and what things that will really help them in progressing both in their emotional and spiritual life. So it's been an amazing tool.
wow. Let's give the audience a taste of that, a brief example of this. So, according to Arcana-siddhi, Swami Padmanabha is a 9 type with a 1 wing.
There you go.
Right? Okay. Yeah, and of course, when you described to me the different types and all that, I felt, yeah, of course, that's me, and she knows me, so of course she can share the diagnosis accurately. So which is the ego trap that characterizes my type, so to say?
Well, it's the
Remind
nine.
me, remind me, because I can easily forget it. I may be already in that trap back again for sure. Yeah.
Well, the 9 is the peacemaker, harmonizer, and just there's a lot of aspects to the 9, and again levels of health, but the 9s get tripped up in avoiding conflict. They're very conflict avoidant, which I don't see that so much in you. I have seen so that I think you've kind of gone above that aspect of your type.
Or probably I'm not a 9 at all.
No, you healthy 9s are very good at dealing with conflict, but an average range, it's 9s will be very good at checking out, dissociating a little bit, and not wanting to be, their peace is what they want more than anything. And so whatever to keep their inner peace, they'll go to great lengths. And that could mean, checking, dissociation. I see a lot with, more average to unhealthy 9s. They really go somewhere else, check out completely. Anger. I mean, that's, 9s will repress their anger because they don't want to, cause conflict. So a lot of times they'll hold on to that anger and it will erupt at some point. My husband was a 9. And I only saw him get angry a couple times in our marriage. And
that was intense.
It was Mount Vesuvius going off. It was intense. So it's like, wow, now I understand what the Enneagram's talking about, this repressed anger thing.
So let me contrast that to give the audience a little bit of a contrast. Let's share a few words of your own numbers so they can see like how an example of two numbers, 2 perspectives, so they can realize how different a person can be and how different their foundational needs can be, and how important it is to address each person, because being aware of that, so we are addressing the actual correct need and not trying to help them from the wrong place, even with good intention. Yeah,
I had no idea we were going to talk about the Enneagram.
I had no idea either, but
this is so exciting. Yeah, so my type is a 2 with a 3 wing. And so the 2 is the helper. That's the 9 is peacemaker, 2 is the helper. 2s are notorious for being the ones to take on, a lot of caretaking roles for people, and they make good counselors. They have a real aptitude for attunement with people. They can
real attitude for what? Sorry.
they have the ability to attune
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
So it's attunement is like a real gift of the two.
Hmm.
The trap of the two is that they they want, their desire to so strong to be loved, and they think that the way to get love is I have to do it, just never say no, serve you relentlessly.
Yeah.
And if I don't do that, then you'll withdraw love from me. So twos will overextend themselves, and then they become resentful, and they can become martyr-like because they're not getting their needs met. So for twos, learning the word no is a huge part of their progress, is to be able to set appropriate boundaries with themselves and with others, and not overextend themselves. And then I have that three wing, which is the image conscious driven side. That gives me that, in my youth, was very driven kind of person, and had to. In my yearbook, I have more pictures of than anybody else in the yearbook, because I was part of everything. I couldn't just be part of one thing. Being a two and being a three wing, I had to be involved in everything. I had to be, and that was pretty pathetic, because I brought that into Krishna consciousness, and Krishna had to really sit on me for some years to get that passionate kind of energy out of me. And I've really worked on that a lot, and come a long way, and not being driven. And I have some very dear friends that are threes. That's their primary type, and they're very driven. And Krishna has done similar things with health issues. Oftentimes seem to be what Krishna's way of dealing with that energy, to kind of slow us down and get us to go more internal. And yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And again, my intention in asking about two examples of numbers, you and me in this case, is more to give this idea of people have a very different cosmovision and paradigm, even though we are all spiritual souls and we are all devotees and we have so many things in common. Also, we are so different and unique. So if we don't put on the table those differences, that's another way of impersonalism.
Yeah.
So for me, in this case, the Enneagram is very much a radically personal tool to really address each case. And of course, with this, I'm not saying whomever is a two with a three wing or whatever is exactly the same person. No? Inside that, everyone is an individual. We are not boxing people in numbers. but the importance of relating with one another, understanding each one filters reality through a certain paradigm, and it's important to bear that in mind for a proper relationship, for a successful interaction, and not just expecting, as you mentioned, the universal formula will work for everyone in the same way. That's pretty impersonal, and what to speak, making assumptions and judgments and projecting, as you quoted this famous sutra, Atmavam Manjate Jagat. How I see the world, I assume everyone is seeing in the same way. That's a recipe for, as Dira Govinda said recently, a festival of misery.
Yeah.
So that's an open invitation for a festival of misery. Everyone is seeing and feeling what I'm seeing and feeling. So that's so self-centered, so brutally animalistic, insensitive.
Yeah.
Even without bad intention, but just to see reality as everything is seen and feeling what I'm seeing and feeling, that's basically, you have become God suddenly, and everyone has to revolve around your experience. So it's embarrassing to acknowledge that, but I think tools like Enneagram help to be humbled by that, to realize, oh, reality can be perceived in so many other different ways than the one I think it's the only way, So
Yeah.
I think it's simple. It sounds simple. I remember when I saw one of my first contacts with the Enneagram is a series of DVDs you shared with me years ago from Richard Rohr. talking on that. And I remember a few months ago, we also watched another interesting series of lectures with him, and which was Ben Ross, which was his
Russ Hudson.
Russ Hudson, sorry, one of the writers of the Enneagram book. And he will say this simple thing that he say, "Oh, what the Enneagram helped me to realize is that people are different." Sounds simple, but it's like many people doesn't have that insight. People
Yeah.
is unique, different, and we are to relate to each one in a very unique, personalized way. And it's demanding, of course. It's demanding because you cannot force impose a template, universal template on anything, on everything and everyone, and expect success from that. It takes time and investment of life
Yeah.
to treat everyone as a person and reciprocate accordingly. And as I mentioned in my book, one of the negative impetus to write my book was that I was seeing so much impersonalism under the name of personalism, because our tradition is radically personal in principle, in essence, but sometimes it's misrepresented or misconceived in very depersonalized ways. So anyhow, I think the Enneagram, and not only the Enneagram, but hopefully some of the things we are sharing today
Yeah.
are reminding us of what we are supposed to embody as Gaudiya Vaishnavas.
Yes. Yes. That's what. Yeah.
So Arjun-siddhi, I don't know, I think we may be reaching
Our time. I would like to
I
just
wanted to ask if you had anything you may like to share, any concluding points, any wrapping up, whatever you may feel.
yeah. I think that I would be amiss if I didn't bring up this point of, for relationships, for successful relationships, everything, it's really, our sadhana is so critical. And I really want to say that the couples that are really successful are couples that are doing their personal growth work along with really there's a practice, a really strong having some kind of strong spiritual practice every day. And the reason that, there's so much research coming out now in the secular world to support this idea of, they now they have brain imaging, and this Dr. Amen, right? He does like thousands and thousands of PET scans of people's brains. And one of the things that he's witnessed is the very rapid effects of some meditation practice in actually healing the brain. Because he'll show a picture of the brain before and after, like maybe 6 weeks of doing some kind of meditation. The first one will look like Swiss cheese with all these holes in it, and then you look at the next brain and it's nice and smooth, and it's like it's really amazing actually to see that there's a it's actually working on not just the spiritual psychic body, but also working on the physical body as well. It's really powerful. And I just I see that when for myself, when my japa is focused, the more focused my japa is, the more I'm able to be present in my day. And the more I'm able to have that space between the stimulus and the response that Viktor Frankl talks about, where your freedom lies within that little space, it makes that space a little wider. And I see when people don't have any practice, there's no space. Your reactivity just comes. It's like, it's so quick and it's so fast that you don't even realize that you've just been hijacked by your lower nature, and one of your lower parts has just hijacked your core self. So yeah, so we don't chant for this reason, but it's a byproduct it's a byproduct. We chant for love of God and for
Mm,
bhakti, and we do it. But there's so many powerful effects of chanting um, that affect our everyday life in this dimension, and can make our lives so much more peaceful and so much more harmonious and
mm,
connected. It's just, yeah, it's so important. I can't emphasize it enough.
mm.
So I had to throw that in there as like the as the final words.
Can you one more time repeat Viktor Frankl's quote, please?
Oh, between the stimulus and the response, there is this little space, and in that space lies our freedom.
Hmm. Jai. Viktor Frankl ki jai.
Uh, Great quote. I mean, it's
Yeah,
just personal
yeah,
growth for
yeah. And I love Viktor Frankl, of course. He's such a great author and such a human
great
being,
example. Oh my God,
such an
yeah,
everything. Yeah. So
yeah.
yeah, I really appreciate your concluding point, Arjun and Siddhi, because of course, and I think I tried to make that clear many times during different episodes. But whenever we are talking about things like Enneagram or other things, we are not trying to suggest you can replace your sadhana with self growth work or this thing or that, but just it's a complement to the most crucial thing, which will be your the daily time you spend trying to connect as deep as possible with the divine through your practice and whatever form you're practicing, however quantity you can maintain your vows and so on, as we talked about, but not downplaying, not dismissing that, watering the root of the tree, so to say. And I must say, and you can cover your ears if you want Arjun and Sid at this point, but I personally witnessed how Arjun and Sid is very serious sadhaka. Whenever I go
Mm,
to Alacha, I stayed with other devotees at her place, I every time in the morning, I mean, I confess I have no problem. I mean, every time I wake up, she's not waking me up, but she's always already chanting her japa, sometimes for hours. So I really appreciate she's sitting there in front of Sri Sri Radha Gopinath, her beautiful Istadev, and chanting for a long time, seated there fixed, and not as an external thing, but just you can feel, okay, she's really committed to her sadhana, and I can relate how much uh, I'm talking about you. I don't want to sound like I'm talking about someone else far. How much you are trying to see connect those two things, and that's why you're so good at counseling other people and helping other people, because you take so seriously
mm,
your spiritual practice on a daily basis. So I appreciate your mentioning that. I mean,
mm,
it was obvious that it will come from someone like you at the end, having to say that, because that's so crucial for you. And
mm.
of course, it's not so only crucial for you, and that's only Archana Sid. It's crucial for her, but it's crucial for all of us. No? So when we are talking about all the things, it's never to neglect or downplay bhakti, but on the contrary, to learn how to complement bhakti and how to see how everything has the potential to become bhakti, as Jiva Goswami will say when he talks about Sangha Siddha Bhakti. Things that are not inherently bhakti can become such by association with bhakti. So peeling potatoes can become bhakti, taking a shower can become bhakti, doing a podcast hopefully can become bhakti. but but for but for that to happen, for us to be able to create that sangha, to associate something with bhakti, first we have to be grounded into what he calls Swarup Siddha Bhakti, which means those activities which are inherently bhakti, like chanting, sadhu sangha, studying Bhagavata, and all these main bhakti angas. So
Beautiful.
anyhow, I appreciated that point as a concluding note, which is very, very, very crucial. So I want to thank you for your presence again, Argentina. I will share again one more time for those who connected later the link for those
Mm,
who would like to get to know more about her work and others' work in this circle of bonds that will be freeing us. The website is Vaishnava without H, Vaishnava Family Resources .org. So basically that's the link. Mm. And Arcana-siddhi has a lot of articles and videos on this site for those who would like to go through them. And there's also a directory of therapists, right? Arcana-siddhi
Mhm.
and marriage coaches on this site as well for those who would like to share. There is one message here from Brinda Sundari from
Mhm.
Denver. She's saying, I appreciate this conversation and the topics discussed. Thanks to both of you.
Jai.
Thank you, Brinda Sundari, because also Brinda Sundari will be our next guest. So she appeared
Oh,
just on time. We will be talking with her the following Saturday, August 12th at 10 a.m. EDT time.
I
And
look
somehow,
forward to that.
sorry?
I look forward to that.
Yeah. And the topic will be somehow a natural continuation and overflowing of today's topic. We will be talking with Brinda Sundari on transformative communication in Bhakti. Mm. So
Very
that
nice.
will be next Saturday. So hopefully we can meet each other there. And that's it. Thank you so much again, Archana Siddhi, for coming. It has been a pleasure. It has been
Yes.
a blessing for me. So very happy
Likewise.
to share
Yeah.
with you and extend your wisdom and your heart to others. So thank you so much to you, and thank you so much to all of you who have been connected today. And see you next weekend.
Jai. Hare Krishna.
Jai.